Imagine you're standing on the surface of Mars. The sky above you isn't blue, it's butterscotch, a pale, sickly tan that stretches endlessly across the horizon. The sun, though 140 million kilometers away, hangs small and dim in that alien sky. Music around you, rust-colored dust, stretches to the edge of the world. Rocks scattered across an ancient, dead landscape. It looks peaceful. Desolate, yes, but peaceful. Barren, empty, safe. Music. But that's the lie Mars wants you to believe. Because beneath that serene surface lies one of the most hostile, dangerous, and actively destructive environments in our solar system. Mars isn't just dead, it's actively killing. Music. And if humanity is going to survive there, we need to understand exactly what we're walking into. Most people think of Mars as the next frontier, a stepping stone to the stars, a backup plan for humanity. Music. NASA calls it the most likely candidate for human colonization. Scientists dream of terraforming it. Billionaires plan to establish settlements there. But they're all looking at Mars through rose-tinted glasses. Music. Because the reality is far darker. Mars is a planet that has spent the last 3 billion years slowly dying, and in that death, it has become something far more dangerous than we ever imagined. Let's start with what killed Mars in the first place. Music. 4.5 billion years ago, Mars was different. It had a thick atmosphere. Liquid water flowed across its surface. It had a magnetic field that protected it from the solar wind. Music. It was, by all accounts, a living world. And then something catastrophic happened. Mars lost its magnetic field. Music scientists still debate exactly why. Some believe a massive impact disrupted the planet's core. Others suggest the core simply cooled too quickly. But the result was always the same. Without a magnetic field, Mars became defenseless. Music. The solar wind, a constant stream of charged particles from the sun, began stripping away the atmosphere, molecule by molecule, year after year, billion after billion. Music. This process, called atmospheric escape, is still happening today. Mars is still losing its atmosphere, still dying, still becoming more hostile. And here's what makes this truly terrifying. Music. We can see it happening in real time. NASA's MAVEN spacecraft has been measuring the rate of atmospheric loss. Every second, Mars loses about 100 grams of atmosphere to space. Music. That doesn't sound like much. But over billions of years, it adds up. Mars has lost 99% of its original atmosphere. What remains is a thin, toxic haze, barely 1% as dense as Earth's. Music. You cannot breathe on Mars, not for a second, not with any technology we currently possess. The pressure is so low that water boils at room temperature. Your blood would boil. Music. Your lungs would rupture. You would die in minutes without a pressurized suit. But the thin atmosphere is just the beginning. Music. Because without that protective blanket of air, Mars is exposed to something far worse. Radiation. Music. Earth's magnetic field and thick atmosphere shield us from cosmic radiation and solar radiation. We barely notice it. Mars has neither. Music. The radiation on Mars's surface is roughly 50 times higher than on Earth. In some places, it's even worse. Music. An astronaut on Mars would receive a radiation dose equivalent to 30 chest X-rays every single day. Music. Every single day. Over the course of a 2-year mission, an astronaut would accumulate a radiation dose that significantly increases their risk of cancer, cataracts, and neurological damage. Music. And that's assuming they stay inside a habitat. If they venture outside, even in a spacesuit, the radiation exposure accelerates. Music. NASA has calculated that a human on Mars would receive a lifetime dose of radiation in just a few years. The long-term health consequences are staggering. Music. But radiation isn't the only invisible killer. Mars' atmosphere, thin as it is composed primarily of carbon dioxide. Music. But it also contains perchlorates, toxic chemicals that don't exist naturally on Earth. Music. These perchlorates are everywhere on Mars, in the soil, in the dust, in the air, and they're deadly. Music. Perchlorates damage the thyroid gland. They interfere with iodine absorption. Prolonged exposure causes neurological damage, especially in children. Music. If humans are going to live on Mars, they'll have to deal with perchlorates constantly. Every habitat will need advanced filtration. Every suit will need protection. Music. And even then, there's no guarantee it will be enough. But let's talk about the dust itself. Music. Martian dust isn't like Earth dust. It's not just particles of rock and soil. It's sharp, abrasive, electrostatically charged. Music. When dust storms sweep across Mars, and they do regularly, they create walls of particles that can reach speeds of 60 miles per hour. Music. These storms can last for months. They can cover the entire planet. Music. In 2018, a global dust storm on Mars was so severe that it blocked out the sun. Solar-powered rovers went dark. Temperatures plummeted. Music. The dust itself is so fine that it penetrates seals. It damages equipment. It scratches visors. It gets into everything. Music. And because it's electrostatically charged, it clings to spacesuits, to equipment, to habitats. It's nearly impossible to remove. Music. Astronauts on Mars would spend enormous amounts of time and resources just trying to keep the dust out. Music. But here's what makes Martian dust truly terrifying. It's toxic. Music. The dust contains iron oxides which give Mars its red color, but it also contains perchlorates, as we discussed, and possibly other compounds we haven't even identified yet. Music. When this dust gets into the lungs, it causes inflammation. It damages tissue. Prolonged exposure could lead to a condition similar to silicosis, a disease that scars the lungs and makes breathing progressively harder. Music. Astronauts on Mars would be breathing this dust constantly, even inside their habitats, because no seal is perfect. Music. Over years, the cumulative damage could be severe, and we still don't fully understand all the health consequences. Music. Now let's talk about temperature. Mars is cold, brutally cold. Music. The average temperature on Mars is minus 65 degrees Celsius. That's minus 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Music. At the poles, it drops to minus 125 degrees Celsius. That's colder than the coldest place on Earth. Music. At those temperatures, carbon dioxide freezes. It forms dry ice. Music. Mechanical systems fail. Batteries lose their charge. Lubricants become brittle. Music. Every piece of equipment on Mars has to be specially designed to function in extreme cold, and even then, it degrades faster than on Earth. Music. Astronauts in spacesuits would have limited time outside, a few hours at most before the cold becomes life-threatening. Music. And if something goes wrong, if a suit tears, if a heating system fails, death comes quickly. Music. But temperature isn't constant on Mars. It fluctuates wildly. Music. During the day, the surface can warm to just above freezing. At night, it plummets back to minus 80 degrees. Music. This thermal cycling, the constant expansion and contraction, damages equipment. It cracks materials. It weakens structures. Music. A habitat on Mars would need constant maintenance just to survive the temperature swings. Music. And then there's the water, or rather, the lack of it. Music. Mars once had oceans, rivers, lakes, rainfall, but all of that is gone. Music. What remains is frozen in the polar ice caps and buried beneath the surface as permafrost. Music. Liquid water cannot exist on Mars's surface. The pressure is too low. The temperature is too cold. Music. Water would either freeze solid or sublimate directly into vapor. Music. This creates an enormous problem for human colonization. Water is essential for drinking, for growing food, for generating oxygen, for cooling equipment. Music. Extracting water from Mars is possible, but it's energy-intensive. It requires drilling deep into the permafrost. It requires heating and processing. Music. Every liter of water on Mars would be precious, rationed, fought over. Music. And if the extraction systems fail, the colony dies. Music. But here's what really makes Mars terrifying. It's not just hostile, it's actively hostile. Music. Mars has weather, dust storms, as we discussed, but also wind. Music. The winds on Mars can reach 60 miles per hour. In a thin atmosphere that doesn't create the same force as on Earth, but it's still enough to topple equipment, to damage structures, to create hazards. Music. And the dust storms, they're not just inconvenient, they're catastrophic. Music. In 2018, the Opportunity rover was buried by dust and lost. A rover that had been operating for 15 years. Music. Buried, gone, because of a dust storm. Music. If a dust storm like that hit a human colony, the consequences would be severe. Power loss, communication loss, structural damage. Music. And rescue would be impossible. The nearest help is months away. Music. Now let's talk about what Mars does to the human body. Music. We've discussed radiation, dust, cold, and thin atmosphere. But there's more. Music. Mars has only 38% of Earth's gravity. Music. In low gravity, the human body begins to deteriorate. Muscles atrophy, bones lose density, the cardiovascular system weakens. Music. Astronauts on the International Space Station, which orbits in microgravity, lose about 20% of their muscle mass in just 6 months. Music. On Mars, with 38% gravity, the deterioration would be slower but still significant. Music. Over years, an astronaut's body would become weaker, less capable, more fragile. Music. And if they ever return to Earth, the readjustment would be agonizing. Music. But that's assuming they survive long enough to return. Music. Because Mars is also geologically active. Music. Most people think of Mars as a dead, stable world, but it's not. Music. Mars has volcanoes, massive ones. Olympus Mons is the largest volcano in the solar system. Music. It's so large that if you stood on its slopes, you wouldn't be able to see the summit. The curvature of Mars would block your view. Music. And while these volcanoes are dormant, they're not necessarily extinct. Music. There's evidence of recent volcanic activity on Mars within the last few million years. Music. In geological terms, that's recent. And it suggests that Mars could erupt again. Music. A major volcanic eruption on Mars could release massive amounts of dust and ash into the atmosphere. Music. It could trigger global dust storms. It could bury colonies. It could kill everyone. Music. And there's nothing we could do about it. Music. Mars also has earthquakes, Marsquakes. Music. NASA's InSight lander detected hundreds of them, some quite powerful. Music. A major Marsquake could damage habitats. It could trigger avalanches. It could destabilize structures. Music. And again, rescue would be impossible. Music. So here's the reality. Mars isn't a frontier waiting to be conquered. Music. It's a graveyard waiting to claim the ambitious. Music. Every human who sets foot on Mars will be taking an enormous risk. Music. They will be exposed to radiation that increases their cancer risk. Music. They will be breathing toxic dust that damages their lungs. Music. They will be living in extreme cold that tests every piece of equipment. Music. They will be dependent on fragile systems that could fail at any moment. Music. They will be months away from help, months away from rescue. Music. And if something goes wrong, they will die. Music. But here's the thing, we're going anyway. Music. Because despite all of this, Mars represents something fundamental to humanity. Music. It's the next step, the next frontier, the next world. Music. We've always been explorers. We've always pushed into hostile environments. Music. We crossed oceans. We climbed mountains. We went to space. Music. Mars is the logical next step. Music. And yes, it will be dangerous. Yes, people will probably die. Music. But the knowledge we'll gain, the resources we might find, the possibility of establishing a second home for humanity, it might be worth it. Music, or it might not. Music. That's the choice we have to make. Music. Mars isn't harmless. It's anything but. Music. But it's calling to us anyway, and we're listening. Music. The red planet waits. Hostile, deadly, indifferent. Music. And we're coming. Music. I hope this gave you a new perspective on Mars. The solar system is far more dangerous than it appears, and Mars is proof that even the most inviting worlds can